group meeting on increasing participation. What did we call this, actually? Broadening
in science and engineering.
Broadening participation in science and engineering. Just a few words about the Science and Justice Working Group, just to set the tone and give you guys a sense. For those of you who haven't been to a Science and Justice Working Group meeting, the goal of the working group is to get people from multiple different parts of the campus, but also from outside the campus, to get together to work on common problems. And I think this question of who's doing science and at what levels is definitely a common problem, particularly in a period of time where more and more of how we are envisioning the future involves science and technology. It's extremely important to think about these issues. The working group proceeds not with formal presentations per se, but more in the spirit of working together on a common problem. So, so speakers will be talking from probably just from where they are and not doing formal presentations. So I think what we're trying to do, this is the beginning, I think, of a series of discussions we'll be having on this particular topic. I think this is going to become more a focus of science and justice. I want to note that this topic seems to be becoming more in the news. I mean, I just have heard, I heard on NPR just earlier in the week, 2 segments on Morning Edition about 2 different stories, one about diversity in science and engineering and academia, and then one about in industry. There was also an article in Science Magazine, I don't know how many of you saw this, Scientific Diversity Interventions in February of 2014, calling for evidence-based research on these issues. I thought it was funny, the whole move of the idea of clinical trials moving into this. People are getting serious. Yeah. We're going to have proven methods, because what we've tried in the past hasn't worked. So now some randomized clinical controlled trials might do it. But I'm kind of interested in that issue of the rise of this at a time when we certainly aren't seeing much progress, at least at the upper echelons. In fact, we might be seeing some regression in that respect. And so I'm hoping this will be a broad-ranging conversation. We've got a series of speakers who are coming from a really interesting mix of perspectives, both inside the academy and outside the academy. I want to thank Ruth Mueller and introduce her, who's really kind of the person who was the inspiration behind this particular meeting. And Tracy. Yeah, right, that's right, because Ruth suggested it, Tracy was really into it, and thus, or no, Tracy, I don't know, it was sort of like you both had this idea and came together. And Tracy is a Science and Justice Fellow, is in molecular, or actually in biomolecular engineering, graduate student. And Ruth Mueller is a postdoc at Lund University. She started out in molecular biology and then got her PhD in science and technology studies, and has been really focusing on the problem of questions of labor in the life sciences. Who's doing the labor of all of this science and technology we hope that will save the world or do good things or something, and looking at who's doing it, who's not doing it, and under what conditions. So Ruth is going to introduce the panel, and then we'll have a panel discussion. We'll have the panel just present briefly. And then we're going to engage in some amount of discussion, and then we break. Probably we'll break just a little bit after 5, because we got a little bit of a late start, have a bit of food, informal discussion over food, and then come back and discuss some more. So that's the plan. So Ruth, thank you.
Thanks, Jenny, for the introduction. And I just want to say before, I have prepared a couple of words for introduction to the event, but before I'm going to say those words, I just want to say, I think what you just said about how we're always thinking kind of questions of, women, people of color being better represented in the sciences is a process that is continuously getting better. But I think we're at the moment really seeing, especially in connection with the economic crisis, with restructuring efforts at the university, that we're actually having backlashes in certain areas. And I think in this sense, this is a really timely discussion, as it in a way always is. And so, yeah, I want to thank everyone for coming to this event today that I will be hosting. I'm delighted that so many of you are here today to think with us and with our marvelous speakers, whom I will introduce in a few moments. So, just looking back a little bit, the question of who can and who can't participate in producing scientific knowledge and new technologies is maybe as old as the endeavor itself. In its origins, science has kind of demarcated itself from other areas of society exactly by regulating who can and who should give scientific testimony. So when we look back at when the experimental sciences that we today know as the natural sciences gradually emerged in the 17th century, scholars in this field distinguished their activities from other practices of knowing by carving out a profile of the scientist as a modest witness, as it is called in the science studies literature, someone who is able to transcend the body, to transcend emotion, and make neutral, objective, untainted observations about the world as it is. In the context of this time, this scientific person was immediately defined as white, as male, and as upper class. Others, non-white people, non-male people, non-bourgeois people, were denied basically the status of the scientists, even if they were, of course, always essential for the production of scientific knowledge. But they were deemed partial, subjective, imitative in their thinking rather than endowed with the privilege of kind of the universal, objective, and original thought that was kind of reserved for the white upper-class male. So if we look at what has changed since then, as these multiple others gradually demanded access to the sphere of science in the first but even more so in the second half of the 20th century, accessing science often required to prove that they were able to be just as this white bourgeois scientist, free of bias, free of roots, willing to adapt to basically all aspects of scientific culture as it is and as it was. And here, if we look at feminists who have, among others, criticized the approach, arguing that science will not become, in the end, an inclusive sphere if we just add women and people of color and steer, but leave the culture of science basically as it is. So feminist science studies scholars like Sandra Harding, for example, have instead called for what she has called a successive science, a science that radically interrogates its culture as echoing specific values and specific norms that privilege certain groups and certain causes in society. To just give a few examples, for example, scientific ethos often privileges competition as a value over collaboration as a key means for achieving scientific quality, or today it promotes international mobility as a key value of career development, which is as a practice hard to engage in for people with strong ties to local communities, for people with care commitments, health challenges, or those who are otherwise more rooted than this internationally mobile nomadic scientists. So this is just to give a few examples of the non-neutrality of the values of scientific culture then and today. So in our discussion here at Science and Justice today, we want to think about the norms and values of the cultures of science and technology research, the ways in which they create exclusion, and how these effects could be remedied on individual but also on collective levels. We have amazing speakers here today who will contribute experiences and perspective from different areas related to science and technology. And I have the pleasure now to introduce our speakers. I will start with Faye Crosby. And if I say something that is wrong, or if something is missing, please speak up and just add to your biography. Because yeah, I think it's always this moment of describing other people is always quite a sensitive and complex moment because you never know if you're saying the right things. So I will start with Faye Crosby, Provost of Cowell College, Chair of Council of Provosts, and Distinguished Professor of Psychology at UCSC, who specializes in social justice. Her research looks at the relation between objective and subjective reality. She has looked at individual attitudes in the context of social change and stability. Faye Crosby's current work investigates the basis of people's reactions to affirmative action and has launched a new series of studies on how people can undertake non-revolutionary changes, which I find a wonderful expression, in rules that come to be revealed as unfair. She's also examining other ways such as mentoring of enhancing the peaceful evolution of work organizations. Is this?
That's perfect. That's
Great. So I will introduce our second speaker, or should I do it like right before everyone speaks?
No.
Okay, good, I go. Our second speaker is Barb G. Barb G. See that there's the German coming in. She has 35 years of experience in computer industry, where she has held leadership positions in all functional areas. She has worked for Hewlett Packard, Silicon Graphics, TiVo, and other well-known tech companies. In addition, Barb has served in leadership roles in the non-profit sector, including, for example, Huckleberry Youth Programs. And prior to joining the Anita Borg Institute, whom she's representing today, she was the Executive Officer of Human Resources at the Oakland Unified School District. She has also served on the San Mateo County Commission on the Status of Women, the Board of Global Exchange, and is an advisory board member of the STEM Academy at McClymonds High School in Oakland, California. Barb currently serves as the Vice President of Programs for Anita Borg Institute, where she oversees the execution and development of programs focused on increasing the participation of women in technical roles, with the belief that when the inventors of technology mirrors those who use it, society gains. Barb received her bachelor's in electrical engineering and computer science from UC Berkeley and her master's in management at the Sloan School of Management at the MIT. Good. I'd like to introduce our third speaker, Melissa Jurica, Associate Professor of the MCD Biology at UCSC. She heads the Jurica Lab, a research lab at UCSC working to understand the structural and functional analysis of spliceosomes, which are tiny molecular machines found in all human cells, as they play a critical role in how our genes encode for an organism as unique and complex as a human being. Melissa just took over as a director of the initiative to maximize student development, formerly student diversity, which is an NIH grant to support undergrad and graduate students from underrepresented minorities in the biomedical sciences at UCSC. I'm going to introduce our last speaker, who is Joan Herron, a research fellow at CSAGEN, which is the Cardiff Center for the Ethical and Social Aspects of Genomics and Epigenetics, at the Cardiff School of Social Sciences. Her research revolves around gender, representation, and technoscience. She is particularly interested in the policing of boundaries between science fact and science fiction. Joan has a Bachelor in Literature and History from North Staffordshire Polytech, a Master in Gender, Society and Culture from Birkbeck College, University of London, and a PhD in Sociology from Warwick University. She co-authored the monograph Human Cloning in the Media, From Science Fiction to Science Practice, which drew together media, cultural, and feminist technoscience studies preoccupations and methodologies to document the symbolic and material labor of making the genomics in the media. I would like to ask everyone of you for me a short applause to welcome our speakers. And Faith, could I?
Sure.
We will have short input statements up to 10 minutes from each of our speakers, and after the 4 statements, we will then open up the floor for questions and discussion.
And food.
And food, yeah.
So thanks. I'm delighted to have been invited. It's really fun to be here. It's nice to see some old friends and make some new friends. And I'm a social psychologist, so I have hard science envy. So I'm going to start by saying that I think that the positivist value that was articulated by Karl Popper, that you state whether something is going to be true or not, then you state what will refute your ideas, and then you go out and you test it, and then you say, oops, my theory was right or my theory was wrong, is in fact something that I embrace and love, and I think it's an epistemic value that is without gender. So I think that when scientists exclude women, they are falling away from their own epistemic value. They are pretending to have this positivist view, but actually not having it. So an example of that would be, not in science, but in music. It used to be that people had all these theories about how women couldn't play music the same way that men did. It wasn't as soulful. You could tell the difference of a woman playing the piano and a man. And so they started having the auditions to join a symphony behind a curtain. And of course, in the fashion of Karl Popper, the chauvinists, the male chauvinists would say, I'll be able to tell whether that's a male or a female, and of course they couldn't. And for those of us who are long in the tooth, we've noticed that there's a change in the composition of people who are playing in symphony orchestras. So I think what happens is that there's a pretense of using the standards of merit, of using different ways of saying, hey, if this person comes to that level, that we should give that person tenure, or give them a job, or whatever it is. And yet there are ways in which non-scientific values, sexist, racist, homophobic values, for example, creep in. And I'll give you a demonstration of this that was done by one of my colleagues in an area that both he and I work on, which is affirmative action. I'm giving you the broad outline of an experiment without all the details. They had, as I recollect, I may have some of my recollection wrong, they had white male subjects who received information about a person of color or a white person, both a person of color and a white person, who happened to be applicants for one prize. You could only have one prize. The person of color was, in half of the situations, the person of color had great test scores, but kind of bad recommendations. In the other instance, the other half, and the subjects were randomly assigned, so you didn't self-select into this group or the other group, it was flipped. These white undergraduates predominantly chose the white applicant as the one who should get the prize. And when you ask them, well, why had you done it? They said, well, because we're upholding standards. So for the half where the white person excelled on the letters of recommendation, they said, as proven by the letters of recommendation. And for the other half, they said, as proven by the test scores. So when you've got ambiguous data that could be interpreted one way or another, those non-scientific prejudgments, also known as prejudices, come in and exclude people. Now, this would put me at loggerheads with people who say women have a different way of knowing than men do. I think women and men have the same way of knowing. I think the anatomical differences do not extend to our brains, and that old studies about corpus callosum notwithstanding, that women process math the same way that men process math, that men think about Barbie dolls the same way that women think about Barbie dolls, and so on. So it's that somehow those non-scientific ways are then influencing people to keep women out of science. And so the answer wouldn't be to change the way we do science and make it warm and heartfelt, but the answer would be to be actually cold and ruthless and as scientific as you possibly can be. In other words, have guys apply to themselves the rules that they have been espousing that they're saying. Okay, so having said all that, I'm going to say quickly some other things on my brain dump. I think that people do not go out of their way to discriminate against women, but they do go out of their way to discriminate in favor of men. So we can be nice people. We can give the job to the neighbor kid. We can go out of our way to write the letter of recommendation. And it tends to be the person who's familiar to us and who's familiar to what our model would be of a person who would merit that extra effort. So I think in the United States that it is very, very rare that somebody goes out of their way to keep somebody down. But if you've got different groups and people in powerful positions are going out of their way to elevate somebody, you've got a differential outcome that's going to result. So it's not people twisting their mustaches and saying, ha ha, we've got to keep women out. But it's that there's some kind of an unexamined, that these guys have not been scientific with their own examination of their own preconceptions, some kind of mechanism operating. And a woman named Mahzarin Banaji has the implicit association test that you can go online, you can take the implicit association test, and you'll find that many people implicitly associate being a scientist with being a man. So you've got to overcome some prejudices that you have in yourself. Okay, you might say, well, why don't women get up in arms and notice this? And that's where my research, I last had an idea in 1992, so these are old ideas for me. But in my research, we were saying, why didn't women come up in arms and storm the barricades? And actually, again, if you think about science, if you have one data point, you can't know anything. So a woman will say, oh my God, I didn't get tenure. Or, oh my goodness, that guy got offered the job and I didn't get offered it. Or, oh my word, that man's earning twice as much as what I'm earning. And then, because you have essentially one comparison, which is one data point, you can't make any conclusions at all. And often the conclusion that would be made is, oh, I should have tried harder. Oh, I should have taken those assertiveness lessons. Oh, I should have published this other thing. Oh, I should have played the game. Well, maybe or maybe not. So this is where affirmative action comes in. You need a lot of data so that you can look for a pattern, the same as we would do in any other field of endeavor. You collect your data, you look for a pattern. So when we're looking just at ourselves, we don't have that way of looking at the pattern. Okay, little anecdote, a couple of other little anecdotes. I think that subtle things make it hard for men to realize what they're doing and hard for women to realize it too. And by the way, you know, women and men live together, love each other. You can have sons, you can have fathers, you can have brothers, you can have husbands. I'm not saying that this is the war of the sexes. I'm saying that women and men need to unite against those old ideas. But here comes an example. I was at a scientific meeting, I think it was AAAS, and I was there with a woman named Jean Baker Miller. In my field of psychology, Jean, who has now passed away, was a goddess. So there are institutes named after her. There's a whole wing of Wellesley College that's devoted to her institute and so on. And Jean and I were at this meeting, and an eminent, I think he was a biologist, he was a famous guy, and I'm blanking on who it was, wanted to put all of the audience members at ease. And he was going to launch into something very scientific, but to put everybody at ease, he said, you know, guys, that moment in the day when you come in and you loosen your tie. And Jean and I looked at each other and said, you mean that moment in the day when you take off your pantyhose? So sometimes he wasn't trying to exclude us, but the unintended consequence was that we felt excluded, which we did anyway because we were in a room of 500 people and there were maybe 10 women in it at that time. I started out my academic life at Yale, and one time a guy named Michael Kubovi was talking about 50 years of social sciences in the psych department at Yale. And he gave this example where he said, I knew that I was in the right place when I walked into the men's room and I was standing next to so-and-so and we were there peeing and we were talking about such and such cognitive dissonance theory or something like that. And I thought, you know, I'm never going to walk into that men's room and have that experience. And then this was reinforced in my thinking when I went to Japan. This is my last anecdote, I'll stop here. So in Japan, I was with a very dear friend, and we went to the women's baths at a very high prestige place. And there were these, it was very luxurious, and it was a huge room with spring-fed baths and so on. And I don't speak Japanese, but my friend, Kazuko, explained to me, I said, Kazuko, what's up with that group of women over there? Now, everybody's naked, right? Everybody's naked. So there was a group of women who, 3 women sort of gray-haired like me, and 1 woman who was quite young. And I said, what's over there? And she said, well, those are 3 managers. That's the top manager over there, and 2 middle managers, and that's their secretary. And I thought, whoa. This is a different culture than I am used to. So in a culture where you are going to get naked with some people, you're going to have some revelations and some ease of conversation. This idea was reinforced to me when we went back to Kyoto, and we went to the Kyoto baths. Kazuko and I went to the women's side, and Naruo, her husband, went to the men's side. And afterwards we converged. And Kazuko said, Naruo, how was your bath today? He said, great. Mr. Smith and I conducted a lot of business. Now that was Mr. Smith. He didn't say Joe. He said Mr. Smith. So there's a kind of a formality, but a lack of formality. And I thought, oh man, it might be bad in the United States, but in Japan, women are never going to get ahead until they get rid of the baths. The baths are not there to keep women down, but the unintended consequence is that there's a structural barrier to having that kind of ease of communication and repartee that would all put you on the same page with each other. So if we could be more objective, and I don't think neutrality and objectivity are the same thing. If we could be more objective about our own behavior, including our cultural values that slip in there, I think that objectivity would mean that women, people of color, people who look different on certain attributes from the standard start flooding into the field. So those are my remarks. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sarah, do you want to follow up?
So in the spirit of diversity, Jake invited someone who was not from the college to speak. I'm actually not a researcher, but what I thought I would do is talk a bit about the work of Anita Borg and how we connect research. We're actually consumers of research, how we use research to shape the programs that help us carry out our mission. Has anyone in here been to the Grace Hopper celebration for Women of Computing? Oh, great. One time, multiple times?
Many.
Multiple.
When did you start going?
Go ahead, Emily.
2001 maybe? I was an undergrad at the time.
Wow.
Yeah, it's 10 years.
Great. So that's our signature program. We have a number of others I'll talk about, but the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing is the largest gathering of, we're not supposed to say the phrase technical women anymore, women technologists. Last year we drew almost 5,000 women from 53 countries. We hold a similar conference in India 1 month after that, and it draws about 1,200. We're actually venue limited in India. But that whole program, which is really, it's more than a conference, it's a community convening, and it is, I can't even tell you, there's a gazillion things going on during that week. And it looks like a collection of a lot of convenings, but it's a very crafted program focused on cutting down barriers that we know from research exist for women in technical jobs. So, you know, barrier number one, sense of isolation. Many of the people who are at our conference, you know, they're the only women in the class, they're the only women at work. So there is a sense of isolation. So this is a convening where we help women build out their social networks. We know women don't leverage social networks in their career as much as men. So this is a very, if anyone's gone to one, it is like you can be the shyest person, you know, engineers are kind of shy, and you will just see the place abuzz. It's a very comfortable place. Women are, I have women coming up to me all the time of all ages that tell me how this event changed their life. You know, I decided in '96 after launching a subsidiary that I was never doing an event again. And then I ended up with it, but it's really more than an event. So that's one place, you know, not having enough role models. There are role models galore at the Grace Hopper celebration at all levels. You know, women CEOs, new college, the 4,700, 1,900 of them were college students from hundreds of universities. There are role models of all ages and at all the stages of the career showing their work off. We have a poster competition, 200 people show off posters that we want women to have a chance to show their research, be judged. We're the biggest supplier of competitors to the national ACM competition. So it's a huge thing. Our career fair alone would be a noteworthy event. People are getting job offers right now. I mean, it's a very vibrant job market. So basically, the Anita Borg Institute exists because we do believe that the people at the table inventing technology need to mirror the people in society that are buying them. And we can tell you, you know, horror stories like the first dictaphone. You know, it was all men engineering group. They put the prototype together. they recorded the voices, and they only used men. So if they finally put the product in the hands of the women stenographers who were going to be using it bombed. So, I mean, that's just one example of why it's important that your customer be part of the invention team. And there's we have a paper you can get on our website called The Case for Investing in Women. It's just chock full of evidence from research that having diverse teams makes a difference. If you look at research around who does patents, you'll find that there are way fewer women cited on patents, yet if you just look at the patents most cited, the percent of them that have women on their team is higher. So there's lots of data that tells us that you don't even have to sentimentally believe that women should be engineers. It's just good business sense. We serve two audiences. One are women who are technologists themselves, and organizations that view technology as a strategic imperative. And the problem sets for both do somewhat overlap, and they're somewhat different. So for women, again, cutting down the isolation, creating a support system, putting role models in front of them, showing the breadth of opportunities, because today, as a computer scientist, you can do a whole bunch of stuff. It's no longer just you only get to sit in a cube and do C++ programming. I mean, there is so much to be done that's computing related. And we also know they don't have access to social networks or community to plug in. So all these barriers we are continually, these research-based barriers we're continually trying to eliminate. We have Women in Visions, it's probably our highest rated program, but Grace Hopper is catching up. It's a smaller program. We just had it last week where we give awards to incredibly accomplished women in the area of social impact, technology, leadership, and innovation. So we try to elevate the visibility of women who are really amazing achievers. We hope to turn our Technical Leadership Award into something equivalent to getting a Turing Award from ACM, which is a very big honor in the computing world. We've got a community called Sisters, SYSTERS. Those of you who are engineers should sign up to be part of this. This program actually started before the Institute. So way back in, I think it was 87, Anita Borg, when she was still alive, and about a dozen women at a systems conference ended up in the bathroom together, and and they're like, we're the only ones here, and they created a very confidential listserv called Sisters, because at that time there were pretty horrendous stories of what was happening, whether it was sexual harassment by your thesis advisor or other things that were going on. And so it's a very moderated community, and it's now grown to be about 5,000 women around the world. This is our safe space for women to talk about what's happening and get advice from each other and support without jeopardizing your livelihood. Because speaking up, in a non-private space, you could actually do that. So that's Sisters. We've recently, with the launch of Lean In with Sheryl Sandberg, I think we're her only partner with a co-branded Circle community. So what we are doing is creating curriculum specifically for women following a technical career. So Lean In has all kinds of resources. You can start a Lean In Circle and you can get power and influence, negotiation, leadership, all kinds of training. What we offer in our sub-community are things like patenting. Why is it important, for a technical career, and how do you go about it in a company? How do we just demystify the technical ladder, the road to distinguished engineer, which is a parallel path to management? We don't need to reinvent how to exert more power and influence. We do need to show people how to exert influence in a design review or a key technical meeting where the higher ups and people from other departments are sort of scoping out who's the next CTO or who's really an architect and should be a distinguished engineer. So there's things that are very specific to technical careers that we are creating. And then the last thing, another Another thing the research showed us, we actually did longitudinal studies of the women who came to Grace Hopper on scholarship. So we followed up 3 years later, and we're always evaluating the impact of this conference. And what we found was all these things we call the Hopper effect. You know, I have increased confidence in my ability to be an engineer. I'm doubly committed to pursuing this path. They all hold over time except one thing, and that's plugging into a community. That wanes over time. So we use that research as the basis of where we're building out our next programs, which are regional hubs. We're building out local ABI communities where programming can happen on a more frequent basis, generated by the community, and keep women plugged in. So we do use a lot of research. Now the other half, on the organization side, we're really getting to the nut of culture change. So many of you probably heard the horror stories in the newspaper lately, GitHub story, the GoDaddy story, all these things. This is probably the harder nut to crack, and we call it the flip side of lean in. So Cheryl got a lot of criticism, you know, why do all the women have to just suck it up, you know, and what about all the shit that happens to us on a day-to-day? And she just has been very honest, you know, I'm not saying there aren't institutional barriers, I'm just focusing right now on our own. But with our work with companies, we are trying to do culture change. And this is tough, because you're really talking about unconscious bias and how to get people to be aware that they have unconscious bias and then turning it into real practices. For example, we know from experiments that the same resume with a man's name and a woman's name will get rated differently, the man being higher. So, you know, what does that mean for practice? Well, maybe you don't put names on resumes for the first resume screen, or you know, other companies have adopted that if you're having a candidate panel, that at least you have one woman candidate. You don't have to hire her, but you've got to make sure that you're considering a broader sense. So we're always trying to take what research tells us and turn it into a concrete practice. But the other part of culture change, which to me is the root of really making a movement happen, is attitude change. And how do you craft the aha moments for CEOs who may, in their heart, want to be supportive but not really get it? So this year we have about 4 CEOs. We've been trying to get CEOs to come to Grace Hopper. They get to experience what it's like there. That'll probably do more than 5 papers on diversity. So that's the piece that we're working on now, is how do we affect culture change. The fulcrum of our work is Top Company Award. I'd like to think it's going to eventually become the Deming Award for women in computing, where people want to participate just because the rigor of the process and the data used. We help companies benchmark themselves on how they're doing with women. One of our winners was American Express, who had in their technical workforce gotten 30% women representation all the way up. Intel was one of our winners. It's phenomenal. When I was an engineer, Intel was famous for being a horrible culture. The CTO, who's on our board, started looking at eliminating the unconscious bias that was in their technical ladder. They did a lot of different changes, and they won the award. And they have the lowest turnover among women engineers. So it can be done. It's just really hard work. Last thing is we're putting together some research that we want to do in India. As we expand globally, the issues women face are different country to country. India's way ahead of us. They graduate 50% of their CS majors are women. They have a major retention issue. It's culturally very common to take 6 or 7 years off to have children. So a lot of their diversity efforts have to do with re-entry and how do you on-ramp women or in the second parts of their career. I'm just starting to think about Male Allies program. Just like in the civil rights movement, the white students who sat at the sit-in counter, we need the majority to be allies and to willingly give up power and privilege. And we have some men, many of them on our board, who are, to me, are state-of-the-art in having conversations with other white men and do quite brilliantly, and we just need to spread those practices around more. And finally, we're really now that we're a solid organization, we're very well respected, we're in good financial, we're a social enterprise, we generate a lot of profit, we don't take grants or philanthropy. We're in really good shape, and now we just have to scale up. You know, we're all proud because 13,000 women a year are touched by our programs. There's over 1 million women engineers just in the US. So we kind of can't brag about our market share right now. We're scaling it. And lastly, I just want to fess up. You know, people ask me why I do this, you know, and was it just because you were an engineer when there weren't any women engineers and you feel, and I'm like, no, you know, I grew up a middle class person. I was the first to go to college in my family. I lived the American dream. I watched it crumble behind me. I can't think of any more important thing right now than to rebuild our middle class. And when I look at the jobs, how well they pay, and how many of them we can't fill in the next year or two, I think we have an opportunity in one generation to start rebuilding our middle class. So I can't think of anything more important for us to do.
Thank you, Barb. Melissa? Mom?
Yeah, I mean, we both actually touched on a lot of, I think, what the issues are, and was trying to think of how to approach talking about this today, and I had kind of 3 different things of thoughts. One was, what are the values that we hold as scientists, and where do those values sometimes seem to contradict promoting women in science, minority representation in science? And so some of the things that I was thinking about was objectivity is considered to be inherently important, and it is important, but many times I think we fool ourselves that we're objective about everything. I see an ideal of people have to be focused and have passion in order to excel and do excellent science work. And that means at the expense of having a family, at the expense of being a good neighbor, a good partner, a good citizen. Often it's you are, you know, the people that really go out there and get those Nobel Prizes are the ones who give it their 100%, which then I think that leaves a lot of us, leaves me thinking that's not really the life for me. And so I think trying to decide and find the way that we do good science with focus and passion, but not 100%, I think is important. I see people saying that risk-taking is very important, and risk-taking in terms of being aggressive, and that also, as a woman, I sometimes feel very uncomfortable with that because I was brought up in a culture where that was not a positive feminine value, to be a risk taker or to be aggressive. And so finding a way to actually take risks and be aggressive when I need to be aggressive has always been a challenge, but it's something that I think about. I think that the idea that science is a meritocracy is a lie that we tell ourselves. It's not. It's not that the best rise and that the best win. There's a lot of self-promotion involved. Peer review, which is the way that grants are judged, which is the way that papers are judged by people with their own cultural baggage, and it's inherently affected by that cultural baggage. And the other thing that I was thinking about is that we really value skepticism, which I think is good. You should always ask for the data, but we don't value self-doubt. And I find myself doubting myself constantly, second-guessing myself. And actually, I think that is a form of skepticism, but it's not one that I feel like I don't see it in my male colleagues. Although one of them told me today that I'm second-guessing myself all the time. And so maybe that is happening, I just don't get to see it. And I don't get to relate to it, which I think would be nice. I think the real issue that I find in trying to make a change in improving and expanding diversity in science, and I just wrote a grant to the NIH to get money to support students, undergraduates and graduate students in their training as scientists, and particularly target students from underrepresented groups, students with disabilities, and students from backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds that have probably held them back to some extent. And in writing this grant, I was charged with, one, finding data, because the NIH these days says we want experiments in the grants. You can't just give money to people and support people. We want you to evaluate what you're doing and have, I don't quite know how to do blinded studies, but things along those lines is what they're asking for. But trying then to think about, okay, what is it that I'm going to propose in this grant as a way to, in particular, I felt our graduate programs are not necessarily that welcoming to students of color. We've had complaints from our students and stories that just, when you hear them, you cringe. It's just not right. And if I ask my colleagues, and I look at my colleagues, I would say most of them would not think that they're racist or sexist. And they know that this is important, that we improve diversity, but they don't really realize that, I think they don't understand their own level of privilege, which is important. They don't understand their implicit biases. They don't understand that they're not subjective, and they don't understand this old boys club where they help themselves, and what could be bad about that, helping themselves. And so, I also, when I was an undergraduate, a graduate student, and even a postdoc, I would have said, I'm not sexist, I'm not racist. And right now, I know that I am. I absolutely am. I've taken these implicit bias tests, and it just slaps you in the face. I am as sexist and racist as many of my colleagues. And so I have to work at it, and I have to find ways to educate my colleagues and my students about this. And that's been a place where, really, how do you do this? So one half of my grant is trying to find ideas and ways to do that, and the other half of my grant is developing these support systems that really are key to helping students that are coming up and don't see either a mentor or somebody they need support, and we need to provide that sort of support. So I think that that's really important. So the third thing that I was thinking about, thinking about because I'm female, what is it about me and my life right now is this way. Number one, I'm not a farmer. I grew up on a farm. And I could have easily been the person that took over the farm, but I'm not, because I'm not the boy. My brother is the one who's taking over the farm. Two, I'm not an engineer. I realized much later after college that I really love engineering, but being a female, somehow biology was the way to go. And there was definitely a subtle pressure to go towards biology. I didn't even know about engineering, really. I definitely considered leaving the faculty track during a postdoc. And because I'm a woman, I was actually charged with being responsible for promoting diversity and for advancing the position of women in science by my postdoctoral mentor, who was a woman, and who said, we have to all make sacrifices for this cause, and you need to sacrifice your hoping that you're going to get a